Holy cow. Is this our first live stream? Oh my goodness. I think we're live. I'm going to be following along on my iPad just to be able to see any like comments or questions. This is so crazy. Yeah, this will be interesting. I guess I'm going to have to watch. Let me turn on the audio on this thing too. All right. So I know you can hear me because I just heard you. This is totally, totally random here. Let me angle this down so you can see some of the stuff on the table here. Man, well, I want to welcome you to the Busy Gardener's first live stream. This is super exciting. Glad you can hear me. It is like 106 degrees or something like that out here today. And it's just blowing my mind, even here in the shade. So I've got my little supersized Starbucks Very Berry Refresher. Well, there are a few things that I want to talk about. Hey, yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, you guys. By the way, thank you for those of you who are also following on Instagram. It's sure a lot of fun to connect with you guys on there. It's a little bit easier to have a dialogue than it is in the comment section of YouTube, but YouTube is awesome as well. A few things I wanted to go over in today's live stream. Well, one is to eventually, at the end of it, I'd like to be able to do a Q&A with you. But some other stuff we're going to talk about are whether or not you ought to plant in a fabric fabric pot instead of the ceramic ones. I also want to give you an update and let you see what's going on with some of these seedlings that we started a while ago. And then finally, would like to talk about this Everbearing Mulberry that I got as just a little plant start. And so let's talk about this. Curious, have you guys ever seen or heard about a fabric pot using something like this instead of a ceramic pot? It's interesting to see how these things are constructed. It's kind of like a heavy duty, reminds me in some ways of like a weed barrier fabric, but it's a little bit heavier duty than that. It's almost like what they might put in the middle of a like blackout curtains or something like that, like a very heavy felt. And I'm not sure how great the quality is coming through as far as the video. It looks good on my end, but it's a really kind of heavy duty weave. And you can see that there's some light penetration, but the main point of these things, and the main reason why a lot of times they'll advocate using a fabric pot over a ceramic pot is because of things like water being able to not collect in there and kind of waterlog your plants. But another main reason is that plants actually need air, and they need it in their roots. If you guys follow my channel, you know that I've drowned a few avocados in the past, and it's kind of an interesting thing. People think, oh, well, with water, you just need water, without any consideration for there being any type of breathing that goes on. That's one big reason why with the soil, and while putting mulch on there, you want to make sure that that mulch is a really large size mulch, or like a varied size, so that way air is able to penetrate down through that mulch layer when you're planting a tree. When it comes to plants, this is even more pronounced because you're not going to put a heavy mulch layer on top. But when you take and you fill this up with soil up until this point or whatever it is, what happens is normally in a ceramic pot, think about it, it's a vessel that can hold water. In fact, ancient times, that's how they used to transport water. That was a vessel and a container that they would use because it wouldn't leak. So when you buy a ceramic pot or any type of other pot, you have some sort of plastic thing, you've got to drill holes in it. And if you don't drill holes in it or have a hole already in there, there's no place for that water to go. And certainly the only place that there is for air to come from is from either the top of the roots or coming through that little hole if it's elevated somehow. Well, with a fabric pot, what happens is those roots are able to grow out toward the edges of the pot because there's air that can get in through the entire pot itself. And so the roots, a lot of times they'll see that the root structure ends up getting a bit deeper because it doesn't have to stay near the top to get air. It's able to go down further as well as go out near the edges of the bag. And that can often give you a better growing experience. So believe it or not, this is my first time using fabric pots for my plants. I got these online from Guard Zen. I'll put a link eventually. If you come back to this, I'll put a link to those guys on Amazon. And you'll be able to see this is like really heavy duty. And the reason why I want to try these out, there are a couple of reasons. The growing is obviously one big part of it, but we have to move our stuff around. We've got a garden over here where our kids plug in. They're moving stuff around. We need to do some other little projects, and these little handles here make that super easy. Everything's like double stitched and pretty good. I think that these things last for maybe 3 years is what I remember reading on these fabric pots. I imagine if you just leave them sitting, or if they're not in too crazy sunlight, they may last a little longer than that. But 3 years for some of these, and I don't remember if they're like 15 bucks or 18 bucks. I got these a few months ago. So I'm excited to transplant. I'll do like an actual video of the transplanting of some of these into these grow bags. Now, it's going to be interesting because I'm going to plant some of these seedlings in grow bags, and I'm going to plant some of them. Maybe I'll do some in some actual pots too, and see if there's a difference between the pots as well as putting them straight into the ground. That's going to be interesting to see. So how do they do in the ground? How do they do in ceramic pots? And how do they do in these fabric pots? I know it's really just a bag, but it's just easy to think of it as a pot. A bag is what you carry groceries in. A pot is what you grow your groceries in. So this is what we're going to do. Something that was nice that came with these Guard Zen ones is this 10-pack also have these little labels. And so you use a little marker to write on these, or however you want to do it. And so that way you don't, when you plant them, you know exactly what you're planting, but when you have to come back to it, you don't always remember what in the world you had. So that's up with those garden pots. Okay, brings me to these seedlings and what we did. You may have seen the videos where I started in my garage. I got this cool grow light, the Spider Farmer 1000 or the SF 1000. And what that does, hey, good to see you. What that does is it's essentially an LED grow light that comes on here and allows you to grow, start, and keep your plants growing indoors when you're not able to grow them outside, or maybe the weather doesn't permit. They're a great way to get plants started, especially in climates where it's really cold during the winter time, and you want to get your plants to this stage so that way once that last frost comes through, you're able to just take and plant them straight into the ground without having to wait for them to germinate and turn into seedlings outdoors. And so this has been a real mixed experience for me. Most of the things that I've done in the past have just been to plant directly into my garden and let the seeds do what they're going to do, or buy some started plants and plant them in the garden. This is the first time that I've done an indoor seed starting with this LED grow light. And truth be told, these things, I'm going to take and try to show you a little closer here so that you can see the detail of what I've got going on here. There were, before I tell you kind of what happened, I'll show you what I've got growing here. I've got really 4 different kinds of plants. I have 2 types of kale. One is a premier kale, and the other is a curly kale. I have these tomatoes. These are not beefsteak. What in the world are they called? They're an heirloom tomato, which these look really beat up, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then we've got some jalapenos that are right here that are flowering. When I was asking for things that people wanted me to discuss on this video, one of the things was, hey, can you do one where you're starting plants and maybe you can talk about peppers and tomatoes? And it just so happened that I planted peppers and tomatoes. And so you might notice here that these tomato plants are totally crispy. They're really look really bad. The peppers look all right. The flowers haven't fallen off or anything. And then the kale, it's just totally this overgrown mess with a bunch of dead leaves in here and just crispy stuff going on. There's still life in here, but it definitely has taken a beating. And so I'm going to explain why that is. One of the things that I found when I was doing this was when I first started the seedlings, I saw some really immediate growth and I was so stoked. 18 hours a day of nice light coming on the top of it, getting those seedlings uniformly, germinating and, rising. I was so amazed by those initial shoots. I don't remember what the name of those leaves are, those little starter leaves that come up. And so I was excited about that. I only had to water every once in a while just by lifting this up and pouring some water down into the trough here. But then one thing that I noticed was once these plants started growing and once they started developing some true leaves, they started taking a ton more water. And something that was happening was that whereas before I was able to water this thing once every 4 or 5 days, what I found was that I would now have to come through and water them every couple of days or else they'd start to just be drooping. Or really recently, I'm having to water every single day in this because the heat has gone up. These plants are larger, so the system just takes more water. They're transpirating through their leaves more readily. And so this has now had to be a thing where if I'm not coming in and watering this intentionally every single day, these things totally are drooping. Well, this most recent situation was where it was probably 3 days in between waterings, and this stuff was looking so haggard. Every one of these was just totally slumped over in its chair, and I thought that they were goners for sure. Well, I made sure that I got a bunch of water on them. They mostly revived. Whatever leaves weren't already crispy have largely kind of re-fluffed out or whatever you want to call it. And so this is one downside for doing this sort of thing indoors is that unlike it being outdoors where you've got maybe automatic watering, this is taken in some respects a lot more attention. And the fact that I don't have this growing in a really obvious spot, it's in my garage kind of off to the side, which is where I had room to put the grow light. I don't always see this. I don't go through the garage every single day. And so that caused some issues, as you can see. So it's time to get these things transplanted out of here, repotted, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in the garden and I'm going to put them into these grow bags. Another consideration too is when you're buying seedling trays and seedling starter trays, they've got different size cups. These are probably 2 inches across and maybe 3 inches down. So imagine like, 3/4 of the size of like a Yoplait, Yoplait yogurt thing. What is the question? What are my thoughts on Space Jam 2? I know my younger brother is excited about Space Jam 2. He thought Space Jam 1 was a fantastic movie. I stopped smoking. You stop or you stopped? Stop is kind of an ongoing thing. So continue stopping smoking. Don't smoke, kids. It's not good for you. Anyway, these are so random. Yeah, cotyledons, right, Chris? Thank you. I call them like little parachute starters. They remind me of when somebody jumps out of an airplane and how they've got that little initial chute that's going, and then that's what pulls out the rest of their chute. That's what those little starter leaves remind me of. They kind of go up, they get a little bit of sunlight, they go, okay, it's time to deploy the main leaves, and that's when they do that. So as far as the size of these little areas here, this makes a difference because as those roots grow, you want to make sure that there's enough space for those roots to develop and to continue growing out. Just like trees growing in a pot, the roots can become root bound in there, and if they don't have if they kind of get crunched, then they sometimes will stay crunched, and then you've got to disturb them in order to replant and repot them. And so these sat in here way too long. Realistically speaking, these could have been and probably should have been transplanted a solid month ago, but it was just super busy and I just didn't do it. Another thing that I didn't appreciate at first, and that is feeding these things. When you've got plants that are started in the soil, when you have them planted in your yard or in your orchard or in your garden, there are kind of a lot of nutrients that are there for them to grab, and it kind of can happen really naturally in a lot of respects because it's already there. Well, what I used was an actual organic seedling starter from, I think it was a Jiffy one. I got it at Home Depot, and I think a lot of it is made out of coconut byproduct or ground up coconut husk. And so I thought, well, I'm planting it, it's a medium, and I'm so used to soil having the nutrients in it that are needed. Well, it turned out that this didn't really have many nutrients, and I discovered that like this. I finally went through and I had one of those, the IV Organics Super Blend, the Super Macros Super Blend, and I said, I'm gonna throw some fertilizer, because for 4 weeks, those little cotyledons were hanging out and just standing there, and they're getting tall and leggy. There were no true leaves that were coming out, and they were kind of yellowing. And I thought, what in the world is going on? I thought it was an issue with the grow light. I thought the grow light distance wasn't maybe close enough. And so it was amazing to see that when I put some of that IV Organics Super Blend in here, you put it in water and you kind of let it dissolve in there for a couple of hours, and I just poured it in here, and seriously, within the span of a week, almost every one of these things had true leaves popped out. They had all greened up. They had all grown taller. Within 2 weeks, these things were about half of this height in size, and I've applied that every couple of weeks. It looks like they're about time to do it again. These are starting to yellow up a little bit, which for me is an indicator that I probably need to feed them again. And so that's kind of my thoughts on this whole grow light system. I think the grow light was a total success. If there was a downside to it, again, it's just the watering. Like all of the inputs aside from the light did great. Helped them to grow 18 hours a day. I have it on a timer. Wonderful. But I think the growing medium is okay as long as you're supplementing with fertilizer and as long as you're watering regularly, especially when these things start getting a bit bigger. I'm going to pull one of these out and let you just see what's going on with the roots. And you can see how many didn't make it. There were some kale that just totally bombed out. Here's the remnants of it. Water your plants, kids. At the bottom of it, you notice that the roots are already coming out here. And there are a bunch of, this is going to be an issue when I try to take these out. This will give you an idea of how big these little areas are. Here's my thumb for reference, and I'm not a giant. So this really is not enough space for a plant this size to be doing its thing. So either this should have been transplanted into a larger container sooner, or I should have started out with a larger seedling starter, which I have, and I'm going to use that on the next one. All right, any questions on that stuff? I'm looking here. Let's see, fabric pots. Wow, you have a mulberry tree in a 100-gallon fabric pot, Chris? That's astounding. 100-gallon pot, that's gigantic. That's like, I'm thinking of those 50-gallon barrels and how gigantic those are, and you have it in a fabric pot? I wonder if you have any concerns about what happens when that fabric breaks down. How are you going to deal with the resulting mess and repotting that sort of thing without causing a real issue for your roots? I know that especially tree roots, they can kind of get set in their ways. So perhaps when it's dormant. Well, good luck with that. I'd be curious to hear how that goes. I imagine it's really, really happy until it finally just bursts at the seams. Before we do a Q&A in a couple of minutes, I want to just show you something that's been pretty neat. So I mail ordered a plant, and usually that's not something that I've done. Usually I've gone down to my local nursery. I've bought stuff in like a 5-gallon pot and been able to go home and water it and plant it. Well, I wanted to get something. You can maybe see it over there. See that little playhouse structure over there? Several months ago, when a windstorm blew it like the Wizard of Oz and dumped it halfway over there, I said, okay, from our patio, it used to sit on our patio. I said, we're going to put this thing in the ground and we're just going to have this look like a little cottage up on a hill. And I think it looks like that. It's pretty cute. I kind of like it. The kids go up there and play. And to make it feel a little bit more permanent, I wanted to put some sort of plant or tree there just to see how that would look. And so I reached out to a bunch of you guys, and one of the ideas that somebody gave was an Everbearing mulberry. I thought, wow, that sounds interesting. My dad has a Pakistan red mulberry, and that is not an Everbearing mulberry, but we like the taste. And I thought, wow, an Everbearing mulberry, that this one is dwarf, and so it's going to not look gigantic compared to that little structure. And the fact that it's got little berries on there year round, I was intrigued by that. So I went online and I ordered an Everbearing Mulberry, and it got shipped to me in the mail. And I didn't know what to expect. I thought, wow, how are they going to ship a tree? And so I was expecting something big. Well, imagine my surprise when something came in a box about this size. You know, it was a little bit thicker. I peeled open almost like a business card box. Have you ever gotten like 1,000 business cards? Something roughly that size. And in there was a little tiny seed starter, kind of like what we had here. And coming out of it was this little whip, skinny little whip with maybe 6, 7 leaves on it. And I was skeptical. I thought, this is going to be a real challenge. I'm used to getting established trees. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll let it grow in that thing, and then I'll transplant it into this larger container. And I did that a couple of months ago. And it was kind of not doing anything. And all of a sudden, the thing just boomed. It started going and growing. I kind of had it protected, so it's only getting sunlight a couple of hours a day or a few hours a day. And again, my little secret ingredient, I added that IV Organics, that super blend, and this thing is just doing so awesome. It's in a nice, it's a bit larger system, so I don't have to water it every single day in order for it to be happy. But coming through here and just seeing it grow, you can tell already that the foliage is super happy, very responsive. It's growing great. And so this thing is about ready to transplant over there, and I think I'm going to do that. Rob, I don't remember exactly where I ordered this thing from. It may have even been, believe it or not, it may have even been through a seller on Etsy. Etsy is, they've got all sorts of crafts and stuff, but I suppose that people are also growing little starter plants. I don't remember the name of it, and it was a nursery that I hadn't heard of before, but they have a legit site. So, yeah, I'm really happy with this. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and probably in the next, I don't know, couple of weeks maybe, I'm going to go plant it by the side of there. One big reason why I didn't plant this already was because I didn't want my kids to step on it. I wanted it to be big enough for them to see it, because a little seedling would have just gotten trounced. I mean, imagine if it was the size of one of these things, which is how it started out. So I feel a little bit more comfortable with this. I might put some sort of barrier around it just to give it a fighting chance to do that. Chris, I don't think it's Hertz Garden. I think it's, oh gosh, I just don't remember. It was like a play on words, whatever it was. I'll have to maybe come back and put something in the comments when I remember who that was from. Okay, so that's kind of what's been going on with the stuff. That's going to be as far as the stuff that I want to present today. I want to share with you, but I want to give an opportunity to answer any questions that you guys have. The summer is kind of wrapping up in some ways. There's some questions I might be able to answer about pruning or feeding or planting or fruit tree choices. Any questions that I can answer for you guys? Right now, if there are, put them in the comments in the chat, and so that way they'll pop up in a couple of seconds. I think what I should have done is told you at the beginning to put your questions into that, and that way I'd be able to answer those live. One thing that I want to mention as you're thinking of any questions that you have or curiosities, hey, and even if they're not questions about even if they're not questions about the garden or the orchard specifically, I'm happy to answer any other stuff too, within reason. Okay, so am I growing any plum trees? Chris, yes, I'm growing plum-ish trees. So it turns out I only have one actual plum. I have a Santa Rosa plum that I'm growing. And the others are those interspecific hybrids, those Zager hybrids that are those pluots, apriums, pluaries, and those are kind of get the best of both worlds in some ways. So I do have a plum. Oh, and the Santa Rosa just tastes amazing. I've been so impressed with it. But I'm also really impressed with like the Flavor Grenade pluot. The pluaries, this is the first year that they really gave fruit. And yeah, what did I have? Another pluot. Emerald Drop pluot was new this year. And it's green and really crunchy, really tasty and flavorful as well. So all in all, I think as far as like plum varieties, I think I have maybe 6. I don't know if you count the picatum because that has some plum parentage in it as well. I'm going to be putting out a video on the on Floyd Zager. He passed away a couple of months ago, and I have a video that's in the can ready to be uploaded. So probably in this next week there will be one talks a little bit about him. He's the father of the pluot, and so you should be looking forward to something like that. So forgive me, as you guys are writing your comments, they're showing up on my phone, which is what I'm using to stream, and I'm not seeing them until they're showing up on my iPad here. So spacing between trees, I'm spacing my trees. Well, there are two answers to that question. The space between the trees, I'm generally doing about 3 feet from trunk to trunk when I'm doing a grouping. And that's giving plenty of room for them to branch out. If they were closer, I feel like I'd have a bit of trade-off where I'd be having to prune too much in between. And so 3 feet has done really well for us. And as far as the groupings, from the center of the grouping to the center of the grouping, I don't remember exactly how far they are, but they may be something like 12 feet from the center of the grouping to the center of the grouping. So imagine that this is a tree and this is a tree. You want to make sure that whatever your plan is, you want to kind of think into the future. If you're very, very limited on space, obviously, if you have trees that are closer, they're going to be growing into each other more readily, and that means you're going to have to cut off more wood, more fruiting wood, in order to let those play nice. So the further away you get them, now this thing can totally have its own space, and this has its own space, and you're able to leave more fruiting wood. A tree is going to survive. You're not going to have an issue with the tree dying if you plant them close, but just know that there's a trade-off. The closer you have them, generally speaking, the less fruit that you're going to be able to have, because you're going to have to be more intensive about pruning. So if you're able to plant each grouping further apart, I think that you're going to be happier about that. Another reason for that, if you're able to do it, is because just walking in between the tree groupings, when they were all small, I could easily walk through, but now I find myself having to go almost to the end of a row or kind of crouch down and go in between. That's one of the problems with being a tall person. There aren't many. I'm very, very happy with it, but doing the limbo, it's bad for, and it's bad for being able to get in between, you know, have to hunker under and go underneath groupings of trees. So question here about, did I do anything to protect the tropicals through the winter? Did I have to do anything? Thankfully, no. So the tropical-ish stuff that I have and subtropicals that I have are my citrus, they're my avocados, they're my guava, they're my dragon fruit, and they're my passion fruit. And thankfully, none of those things required any type of intervention to stay okay. You know, we rarely get down into the 20s here. Very rarely. We easily can get down to the very low 30s, 32 even, but we don't get down into the 20s very often. All of this area was it used to be commercial lemon groves. And so that plays really nice with a lot of this stuff. One other thing that I should mention is that my dragon fruit, which is also obviously a tropical cactus, is planted next to a wall. And so that wall during the daytime hours is going to absorb that heat, and then it's going to create radiant heat after hours, you know, once the sun goes down. So that might be helping it. But I know, you guys, it's like some of these tropicals and subtropicals, when that cold weather hits, they used to do these things out here called smudge pots. In fact, those were invented just this neighboring city in Upland, California. Those were where they would burn oil. And what would happen is, because we're kind of a more deserty climate with very little moisture in the air, what would happen was there was no moisture to keep that radiant heat from the ground in, so it would just escape out into the atmosphere. And so what they would do with these smudge pots is that they would light them on fire. They would be pumping out this ugly, ugly, belching smoke. And what that would do would create a little smog and create a little haze that was all around the fruit trees. And what that did was trapped in some of that radiant heat. And so they would have to do that when it would get really, really cold so that they wouldn't have damage. I haven't done anything like that. Obviously, now I'm not going to do a smudge pot because that's just really inconsiderate. I don't think my neighbors would appreciate that, let alone it being the right thing to do. As far as tropicals go, there's one thing that is fairly easy that I want to mention to you. Two things, actually. So one is, if you have some sort of big barrel, like a big trash can or a big water barrel or something like that, that you want to put next to your fruit trees, very close to them, those can create essentially a thermal mass. And so what happens is that barrel of water gets heated up throughout the day, and then that thing acts like a little heat battery, and it'll create some radiant heat as that heat transfers back out of that barrel into the surrounding area near a fruit tree. Just think about, you remember when you were a kid and you would go swimming like with your parents or whatever, and you remember how the pool would be so cold, but then all of a sudden you'd get a hold of your dad, and because your dad was warm, it just made your, you could be hanging onto his arm like a little monkey, and it would keep you warm. And so using that radiant heat in the same way can help keep your fruit trees happy. Another thing that you can consider doing to just give it a fighting chance on those colder times is to plug in some Christmas lights, some incandescent Christmas lights. Not the LED ones, but the old standard ones that can burn out. Those things create a little bit of heat. So if you were to run some through your tree, inside your tree, you're creating a little bit of warmth. It's not going to burn your tree, but you're creating a little bit of warmth, and that's going to help your tree to potentially keep from getting frozen on those coldest nights. So that's something to consider as well. So if you're able to create something that's like a thermal mass, or you're able to string some sort of Christmas lights through it, those are maybe a couple of ideas. Okay, I think maybe there's like just 2 rapid fire questions in there, and we'll be through for this first episode of Busy Gardener Live. How are the blueberries doing? I don't know. I feel like I'm fighting those things. They're doing okay. They look a little burned, and I don't know if that's because of the sun or because I may have kind of overdone it on the fertilizer. Remember, they're in a contained system, in a pot, in a container, so they're a little bit more sensitive to toxicity when it comes to fertilizing. And so that may be one issue. Another problem is that my boysenberries are growing over the top of them, and it's making a real pain in the rear to see those things, and then I've got grass that's growing up inside it, so they're doing okay. I'm going to go through, and I actually need to prune them. This is a good time of year. I'm going to do a video on pruning blueberries as well. This is really probably right about when you want to do it, because it gives them an opportunity to fruit out with some new fruiting wood, or grow out some new fruiting wood. So I don't know. I'm not that happy about that. Are you worried about zone 9B being too hot? If you are, Lucine, don't worry about it. I'm in 9B, and you can totally grow it in 9B. Just grow it. You want to get the Southern High Bush varieties, and there are a ton out there. If you go to davewilson.com, you can look up Northern High Bush and Southern High Bush, and Southern High Bush are adapted for warmer temperatures. And so I don't think that's the issue with my stuff. I think I'm the issue with my stuff. And then finally, Chris, you asked about sooty blotch on my fruit. I don't know. I don't know if I have that. I was just noticing as I was talking that even on the back of this little mulberry, there was some stuff that was on there. It looked kind of sooty and blotchy. Yeah, Jacob, go back and rewatch it. You're welcome to do it. This is going to be up. I'm not getting rid of it. So I don't know, Chris. I'll have to take a look and see what's going on with that. See if there's any sort of issue. So, hey, if you just tuned in or tuned in pretty recently and want to see what happened at the beginning of this video where we talked about what in the world are these bags that I'm going to be growing in, what happened with these seedlings, why does this tomato look so beat up, rewatch the video, all that stuff's going to be on there. Hey, if you haven't joined me on Instagram yet, I want you to do that. I don't know if you've got, I wish I had something to show you. It's TBG for The Busy Gardener _ The Busy Gardener. Somebody already has The Busy Gardener, so it's TBG _ The Busy Gardener. Love to connect with you on there. Sure appreciate you guys tuning in. This is really unique to be able to go back and forth, and I really appreciated it. Thanks for your likes and for your shares and for tuning in and being a part of this thing. One of the most rewarding things about all of this is being able to hear your feedback, hear your stories, and see what you guys are doing. And, I had somebody the other day who messaged me and said, hey, they said, why, you watching your videos gave me the courage to plant some stuff, and they're so freaked out to do it, and I'm so excited to hear that kind of stuff. So anyway, hey, this is so random to do this live, but wait, whether you've got 1 plant growing in your garden or orchard or 500, until next time, say it with me, stay busy.